the Department of Basic Education says it has developed 26 new subjects in the occupational stream and 12 subjects in the vocational stream that will be introduced in high schools from grade 10 to 12 in 2025. The department says this is to help learners with an interest and talent in technical and vocational subjects that are currently not available in the national curriculum. According to the department, learners' opportunities to enter the job market and participate in the economy will improve. Some of the suggested subjects are office administration, design, art, and hairdressing. Well, to talk about this and have a conversation about this is Strategy Director at Yellowwood, Ntombizamasala Hlophe, and looking forward to her views on this. Great to have you. Thanks very much for joining us on the program.
Very welcome to join. Thanks, Leanne, for having me.
So what are your views? I mean, what do you think about this new approach from the Department of Basic Education?
Well, I think, firstly, expanding the curriculum is never a bad idea. I think it is really important to account for the fact that there is, on the top 10 list of skills of the future, creativity is required, the ability to use technology, monitor technology, adapt technology is a required thing. And so the notion of being able to change the idea of what we train young people to be able to do in the future is good. I think probably what most people are struggling with is with matching the list of subjects with what we expect the future to be. And I think that that's really what we're struggling with, is reconciling the idea of how significant a change in industries and life that we're anticipating versus some of the subjects that people have seen on the list. Yeah. And I do think that they are eternal skills. So things that are, I guess, in some ways manual in many ways, there are certain eternal services that we can provide to each other as humans and as people and individuals. But there's probably also a need for us to be a little bit more critical about the kind of application of those skills into certain industries. And that's probably what I certainly would be most interested in understanding, what the department's ambition is around the subjects.
I mean, the department does say that these kind of streams will be introduced to widen chances of employment in post-matric life. But is this what South Africa's workplace needs? I mean, when I read some of the subjects, which in the occupational subjects, it's agricultural study, beauty and nails, arts and crafts, office administration, upholstery, maintenance, motor mechanics, food production. Those are just some of them. Hospitality studies, needlework, bricklaying, plastering, plumbing, hairdressing, vocational, agricultural studies, art and design, digital technology, mechanical technology, and the list goes on. So there is quite a lot that's included in there. But when you look at these subjects, again, to my question, is this what the South African workplace needs?
It's really difficult to be able to say yes or no, Leanne, and that's just largely because I think we are stuck between a very unclear vision for the kind of South Africa we want. So, and by that I mean, I'm not sure that we're all very clear on this is where we want to be competitive globally. We want to be the leading skill at XYZ. We want to be the country that's producing this amount of what the world needs. So I think that is difficult because that's the first part that we haven't articulated as a society, and that we are possibly under-debating with each other, right? By comparison, if you look at certain other countries, they're quite clear that these are the industries that they want to be able to build. If I were to take, for example, the conversation in Europe around agriculture, they're quite clear and cohesive about how much they want to contribute to the world's agricultural production, the extent to which they want to make that efficient, and so technology and investment in that is allocated. And so education, continued education in agriculture makes absolute sense. I think that perhaps what we are lacking in this conversation as South Africans is these are the skills for this version of the world. So if I look at something like agricultural studies, I think it's a worthwhile vocation because people will always need to be fed. The thing that's difficult is to say in the context of what climate in our country, right? So are we going to be training young people who are going to be able to contend with food production in a context where the amount that the soil is actually able to yield is dramatically reduced? So I think we've got to be able to balance employability with the reality of the context in which we're working. And I think the burden right now is that, and understandably so as South Africa, we are incredibly, incredibly obsessed with the short-term employability perspective, but I'm not sure that we're making the choices and decisions that have to do with the kind of society we want to be able to build. Yeah. And so in that sense, The short answer is I'm not sure that these are absolutely the skills that we need. I think what we need absolutely is a way to make people find a way to earn a living. And I'm afraid that we're perhaps leaning on what we believe to be tried and tested methods, but we're not actually contextualizing it in where is the world headed? Where do we want to be competitive? Where do we want to be able to charge a premium? Because employability has to do with things that people are willing to pay money for to be done. And I'm not sure that that necessarily has been factored into the way that we've looked at the list. And I think that will make it really challenging to accept that this is the ideal path and the ideal list of skills that we should be building.
I mean, you bring up so many important points, you really do. As you're speaking, I'm sort of agreeing with you in your sentiments because, you know, when we look at this, it's a long-time phrase that we've been using to describe where we're at right now, and it's called a skills mismatch. We talk about it so much, about the skills that are available in the country and the skills that the job market needs, and also looking to grow South Africa's economy. We are living in an industrialized, technological world. And when I read some of the skills that they will be taught, you know, I almost look back to sort of times when I was in school and when my parents were in school, and we kind of had the same skills that were being taught there. I mean, I don't know, should we not be looking to the world that we're living in, where we need to look at robotics, we need to look at things that have developed so much that we've almost surpassed these kind of skills?
We should be, Leanne, and I think probably one of our biggest challenges as a country, whenever we talk about any framework of the future and in any of the contexts in which we do, I think we struggle with the idea of things not being either or. I think we've gotten very much into this idea that you must either do this or do that. I really think we have to get into a context where we do and. So there's no doubt that there's a context in which our economy currently has skills that are non-technology, right? And it takes a long time to transform an economy towards post-industrialization, technology and innovation. It really does. It's not a 3-month course that you can go on. So even the notion of digital transformation in any of the industries we're talking about is not an overnight thing. But I do think that what we are struggling to do is to be clear about the horizon through which we're saying these skills are being taught because these are the industries that have growing demand in the immediate to short term. And I think that there's a role for that. There's a role to say these are the industries that are going to need a disproportionate amount of people who can service them so that they are viable in future. And so this is what we're adding into the curriculum capacity. That would be one thing. The second part of the stream is then to say, because we understand that by the time a student starting today needs to matriculate in the next 18 years with this kind of capability, this is what we're able to then build in from a longer term view. And I think the part of the conversation that really makes reviewing this curriculum even more challenging is the response from industry to say, sure, we absolutely understand that the education department has invested in this, and this is the demand from industry that we think we'll be able to service. I think we're living in a world now where it's impossible to have an education conversation without an industry and economy conversation going along with it. And I think for as long as the one is absent from the other, we're going to constantly be clashing because then there's no checks and balancing, like you say, to say this is matched with where we're headed and it's matched with the investment agenda and it's matched with where people have interests and capabilities.
Indeed.
And I think that's really what
Indeed, and you cannot work in silos. That is a fact. I mean, we need that research. And I think my next question to you is two-pronged. Firstly, do you feel that government has done enough in terms of identifying how we grow the economy to find and pull out those skills of the youth, of those within the education sector, okay, and worked with the private sector to highlight and find those? That's the one. Then the second, perhaps to weave into this, we as a country have developed ourselves or positioned ourselves as a developmental state. What direction is needed to be taken by this country to build the so-called developmental state? I mean, if we take examples like China, Korea, other Asian countries, how did they grow their economies? Where they are to be right now? Because it is something to admire to see what they do, how they've grown, and we're lagging. So I know I've thrown a lot at you, but perhaps you can get those into your answer.
Sure. I think for the first part of your question, Leanne, it would be hard to say yes, right? It's hard to say that there's been sufficient consultation around the choices on how to grow the economy and what is ideal between all sectors of society. I think that we can't sugarcoat that. We don't do it sufficiently. We don't even have forums and platforms through which to continually do it. And I think that that's probably one of the challenges about that first part, is that it's not about prior to the publication of a list of skills or prior to a decision that needs to be made, that there be some consultation. It's the ongoing consultation. And you see that in evidence by the fact that when the publication of the curriculum list is published, there's no response from any other parts of society to say, in collaboration with the government, this is then the industry plan that would adopt and take those skills forward. So the very absence of a synergy between those conversations is indicative of the fact that we're not speaking and there isn't a sufficient consultation. The second part of your question, though, is I think one of the biggest things that we have to be able to do is, and what those countries you listed did well, is that they articulated a vision for the future, right? They envisaged, this is what we think the world will be, and either decided this is how we will shape that world, which is effectively what China did, and in some instances Korea. They were very clear that they're going to shape the world, and in some instances with Korea, they had the mineral resources through which to do it, right? So the production of some of the technology, they were able to because of what they actually had access to. The second choice is about saying we may not shape the vision of that world, but we will absolutely service the vision of that world. And that's what countries like Singapore are able to do, is to go, someone else may be able to build the industry, but we will capacitate that industry because it will need this. And I think that's really what we're lacking in South Africa, is our ability to say, are we going to shape a certain vision of the future, or are we going to capacitate what's going to be available? So if we take, for instance, it's a really simple example, if we live in construction for a little bit. If you take the fact that absolutely construction skills in the future will be necessary, no doubt, we're always going to need some form of shelter. If we look at the fact that what's coming is a world where we need to be able to build flood-proof houses, because we've got a climate change situation that's creating significant flooding in the southern hemisphere. Now, we've got to ask ourselves, are we going to be the world's leading authority on how to build flood-proof housing? Now, if you did that and then put skills behind that, undoubtedly what you would be able to do is a conversation where South Africans are eager to invest in construction and environmental construction, because it's aligned with what we know will make us competitive in the future.
Indeed.
And I think that's the connective tissue that we need.
Yeah, we got to leave it there. Fabulous food for thought you've given us there. Thank you so very, very much for speaking to us. Strategy Director at Yellowwood, and Ntombizamasala Hlophe, talking to us about these new subjects that the Department of Basic Education will be introducing. 12 subjects in the vocational stream